you feel free to ask and comment and participate. Let's look at the text. Last time that we just started the discussion, I presented several introductions about Bereshit in general. The tension sort of between the messages of the Torah. What is the message of the first chapter, the message of the second chapter, the storylines that run through the Tanakh, through the book of Bereshit, the importance of the book of Bereshit as an introduction. Oh, and by the way, I just wanted to say that we want to dedicate today's class L'Refuah Shlema for Mark's uncle, Moshe ben Hava Balas, who is ill. We wish for him Refuah Shlema b'chol avarav v'chol gidav. We want to pray for him. So we spoke about the importance of Sefer Bereshit being the introduction to the whole Torah, because the legal system of the Torah relies on the foundations of the narratives of Bereshit, of individuals interacting with each other, facing problems, dealing with difficulties, the real life, the real world. And those are things that cannot be legislated, right? For example, when Rachel comes to Yaakov later on and says, "Give me children, or I will die," and he gets upset, and later on that causes a rift in the family. This is a lesson that we learn indirectly, a lesson of communication: what to say, what not to say, how to listen to other people, what to hear, and those are things that cannot be written in the dry language of the legislator. So why am I emphasizing again this point? Because Rashi throws us off course in his first commentary to Bereshit. Rashi is a very important commentator. He has the ability to grasp the whole story and to write in a way that he incorporates midrashim into his writing. A lot of midrashim in his writing is fluent. I mean, we don't feel sometimes that there are seams between the different midrashim that he quotes. He has really this amazing ability to tell a story in his commentary, and you feel his compassion, you feel his care for the community. But one thing that people forget about Rashi, even though he said it himself, is something that he told his grandson, Rashbam, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir. He said, "If I had time, I would write new commentaries according to the new insights I have every day." But people, unfortunately, forget that. So they look at Rashi as a final etched in stone commentary. This is the only way to understand the psukim. They also forget that Rashi wrote within a certain context of his time and his community. And one of the main issues was the Christian persecutions of the Jews and the looming crusades. So the first commentary of Rashi on Bereshit is Lo haya tzarich latchil et haTorah miBereshit. The Torah should not have started in Bereshit. It should have started in the 12th chapter of Shemot, where we read about the first mitzvah, which is Pesach, right? And why did it start in Bereshit? Because God wanted to teach us the land, or the Eretz Israel, belongs to Him, and He gives that land to whomever deserves it. In which way Rashi takes this old midrash that was written under the rule of the Greeks and the Romans, also from the point of view of the oppressed, and he uses it to talk to his community. So the people are asking, why is it that Eretz Israel is controlled by the Muslims and now is going to be taken over by the Christians while we live in exile? He says this is God's world, and this is how He divides it, how He controls it. Now, Rashi answers the question for his generation, but we remain with the question. The premise of the question is the Torah should not have started in Bereshit. It should have started with the mitzvot, and the only reason it's written is for a side issue, that of the inheritance of the land. So that misled some people to think that really only halachic texts should be included in the Torah, and that is, for me, a problem when we approach this beautiful text. Okay, so I want to go now sort of more systematically through the text and analyze it. And we will start with a comparison of the two chapters, which is a must, because we're going to read two different messages, right? So I want to highlight the differences between the two chapters. I think we mentioned some of them last week, and I did in previous classes, but let's look through them. So here's chapter 1 of Bereshit. Rashi already noted several differences between the two chapters, but he answers them locally, meaning each one of them has a local explanation, not within a general picture of the two chapters. And I want to show that we have more than one difference, and that they are systematically at all levels of meaning and understanding in the text. So, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the first pasuk, we read of that Hashem, sorry, not Hashem, that Elohim created et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, the heaven and the earth. In chapter 2, we read, Ele toldot hashamayim v'haaretz beibar'am. That's a conclusion of the first chapter. These are the generations or the history of the heaven and the earth as they were created. And now, when we start the story of the second chapter, we read, Beyom asot Adonai Elohim eretz v'shamayim. On the day that Hashem Elohim created the earth and heavens. So the reversed order of the first chapter. In the first chapter, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, heaven and earth. And here we read earth and heaven. Also, in the first chapter, Elohim, and here Hashem Elohim. Further, okay. Now,
Rabbi.
Yes.
Can I ask a quick question? There's also a difference of the 7 days versus in the day.
Right. Yes, Beyom, like in the second chapter, very good. In the second chapter, everything happens in one day. There's no division of, there's no time units, right? Beyom asot Hashem Elokim eretz v'shamayim. And then everything, the only reference that we might think is a passage of time is towards the end. Vayapel Hashem Elokim tardema ala adam vayishan. Hashem makes Adam fall asleep. Maybe it's night, maybe not. We don't know. But you're right. So there are no time units. That's another important difference. Another important difference is the structure of the chapter, which I think we're very familiar with. The first chapter is divided in very clear structured units. Yom Rishon, Yom Echad, day 1, day 2, third day, fourth day, etc. Right? And each day, also there is an order. There's a system. There's a plan. God approaches the creation. He looks at what is in front of him, and he distinguishes between light and darkness, the heaven and the earth, the firmament, the water below and the water above, the water and land. The land then sprouts forth. It's a process of cosmogony. One phase gives birth to the other, which is actually very similar in general lines to the process of evolution from the Big Bang through evolution. And that is in the first chapter and the first story. And not only everything is structured and clear, at the end of each unit, there is a conclusion. Vayerev, vayiboker, yom echad. And then, and before that, Vayar Elohim et haor ki tov, and God saw that the light is good, and He names it. And then it's day 1. Then God names the rakia, the firmament, heaven, and day 2. God sees that the land is sprouting forth plant. That's good. Ki tov, yom shlishi, ki tov, yom revi'i. There's order, there's planning, and the order is logical, right? It makes sense. First, light and darkness. So almost non-physical entities for us, even though we know the light is physical, but in people's perception, they're not non-physical entities. Then the land, the water, the plants, the sun, and the planets to Leha'ir al haaretz, they come later because only now the land is formed. Then fish, birds, animals, mankind. Perfect procession of progress of the things that are created. Now, what happens? And note the order. First, as I said, only when we look at living things, plants, fish, birds, animals, humans. And the humans are created together. Now let's look at chapter 2. There is no order in chapter 2. Not only there's no order, there's disorder. It's the opposite. It's messy. It's not disorder in the sense of you walk into a room and instead of seeing, bookcases standing neatly and each book is in its place, right? You see books in shelves, but not in a specific order. No, there are bookcases screwed to the ceiling, chairs to the walls, things everywhere. It's a complete mess. Where do we see that? It says God first created the heaven and the earth and the heaven, and then there are no plants yet. God says, because man is not there yet. So God creates vapor to water the land, and then he makes from that land men, and then he plants a garden for that man, and he puts him there. And after creating man, God says, oh, wow, you know what? I missed something here. Man is alone. I need to create a mate for him not to be alone. And you ask yourself, how did God not think about that problem, right? Man is going to be alone. How is he going to procreate? It's not only loneliness, it's about piru urvu, right? There's no procreation unless man, becomes a mushroom. And, then some of these species are, self-generating.
Rabbi, the second chapter looks like a summary first, and then it's more directed towards man and woman. I'm just saying. Besides,
so the classical rabbinical interpretation is that it is a summary or detail, one way or another, of the first chapter, and that's how I grew up with also understanding the.
No, I understand, but it's also could be a different version. You know what I mean? Whatever. So
right. So
we'll talk about that one day.
Right. So the documentary theory, the documentary hypothesis has two different authors because of these differences. And like I said, it's not one. If it were one difference, you say, okay, different view, different perspective. But
whatever it is, but merged together. You know what I mean? Whatever.
Right. So I'll get to the documentary theory. So,
but also it's the animals or the animals come after Adam.
Right. That was right. So now when we talk about the order in the second chapter, men, plants, animals, birds, women. Right? Men, plants, animal, birds, woman. Different order. Also, not just different. The man and the woman are separated by plants, animals, and birds. It's almost as someone deliberately writes things in a different order. Well, you didn't look up the first chapter, at least make it somehow, correlate to the first chapter. Okay, so we have another difference. So we spoke about Elokim versus Hashem Elokim, Eretz v'Shamayim versus Shamayim v'Aretz, order, disorder, clear time units, lack of time, one day, planning, lack of planning, and different order. Now, men and women in the first chapter are created together, and there's an emphasis, B'Tselem Elokim bara oto zachar u'nekeva bera'am vayikra et shemam Adam b'yomi bare'am. They were created together, they're equal, they're on the same level. And then in the second chapter, the woman comes only as an afterthought, as an addition to man, in a way to she's only serving man's needs. He should not be alone. Even though it's described later on beautifully, he clings to his wife and all that, but she is secondary. Even her name, Lezot yikare isha ki meish luko hazot, in verse 23, she should be called a woman because she is derived of man, right? Okay, one more difference, and that is something that I think I found in the writings of either Moshe Greenberg or Naftali Tor Sinai. I don't recall exactly whom. and that is that the way God's actions are described in creation. There's a stark difference between the first chapter and the second chapter. In the first chapter, Vayomer Elokim, Vayikra Elokim, Vayomer Elokim. The God said, and it became. The word Vayas Elokim, which comes afterwards, the word and God made the firmament is just a description, an opening of the Vayomer. God made things through speech, through utterances. And that is a divine act. Only God could do that. Humans cannot do it. We cannot create by speech. Until recently, now we created machines that allow us to create things by speech. But generally speaking, we cannot create things out of nothing by only speaking. And that's the first chapter. But in the second chapter, let's see how are God's actions described. And by the way, the second story starts from verse 4 of chapter 2. The first 3 verses belong to the first one because they are the conclusion of creation, the seventh day. They were moved to the second chapter by the Christian author who divided the chapters, and he wanted to separate Shabbat from creation because it was not a Christian day. That was after Christianity abandoned the day of Shabbat as a day of rest. In any case, in the second chapter, let us see what happens here. Vayitzer Adonai Elohim et Adam afar min ha'adama. God formed, because it comes in the context of afar. Vayitzer afar min ha'adama. The word yotzer in Hebrew means potter, someone who makes pottery, clay utensils, and the action is taking a lump of clay and shaping it, giving it tzura. But it's a human action, right? It's a physical human action. Then the next thing that God does, vayipach be'apav nishmat haim, he blows life into his nostrils or into his mouth, and that also resembles a human action, that of a glass blower. God is an artisan, a craftsman who creates man. And then vayita Hashem Elohim gan be'aydan mikedem, he plants a garden. God is a gardener. Vayatzmach Hashem Elokim, and he makes those trees grow. He attends to the garden. And then Vayapel Hashem Elohim tardema al Adam vayishan, he makes him fall asleep. Vayikach Adam, that's also a human action. He was either an anesthesiologist or a rabbi who used to give really long sermons, right? It makes you fall asleep. Vayikach Ahad mitzarotav vayisgor basar tahtena, and he builds it. Vayiven et hatzela le'adam leisha, he builds it. So God is a builder, a gardener, a potter, and a glass blower in the second chapter. Then one last thing, and this is something that I've noticed after many readings of the text, and I didn't see it in one of any commentator, but if you know of anyone who speaks about that, please let me know. Maybe in biblical criticism, but I didn't see it either. And that is, the first chapter has no negative words. I mean, there are a few in the beginning that we associate with negativity, which are tov vavo v'choshech hapeneto, the very first verse, because you have to set the stage, and none of them is intrinsically evil. The abyss, darkness is necessary, but all these, even if we think of those things as negative, they are subdued in the very first time they appear. Everything is quiet. And then after that, everything is perfect, right? Go back and try to find negative words in the first chapter. It's very, very difficult. Not only, yeah?
Doesn't the Navi say that the world will go back to Tohu Vavohu if you're going to be evil and stuff like that? Is there a mention of that one time?
Yeah.
Using that connotation?
Yeah, the Rabbi said that the world will go back to Tohu Vavohu.
The world will go back to Tohu Vavohu.
Yeah.
Using that and like I said, don't Amorah comparing Israel. I'm just, but you use Tohu Vavohu also.
Yeah, so I think Tohu Vavohu could be understood as negative, but that's the only negative appearance of in this first chapter. It's in the very first paragraph, right? because the Torah tells you there was this tov vavo v'choshech pnei tom, and God controls everything and made it work. But in the second chapter,
Right. Okay.
right, in the
Thank you.
second chapter, we read, "V'chol siach hasadeh terem yeh ba'aretz." There were no shrubs yet. There were no plants yet. God did not bring rain yet. There was no man to cultivate the land, and then God makes sprout forth from the ground Eitz Hadat Tov Vara, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then there's a prohibition. God tells Adam, Lo tochal mimenu, you're not allowed to eat. It's a negative. Ki biyom acholcha mimenu motamut, you will die. And then lo tov, the opposite of tov, ki tov meod, in the first chapter is lo tov yot adam levado. So if we ask anyone, where is the first time the Torah says tov? It's in the first chapter of Bereshit. Where is the first time the Torah says lo tov? In the second chapter of Bereshit. It's stark difference. And then okay, so this is the list, sort of, right, of all these differences. So let's now know, right, roll them off very quickly. So in the first chapter, the name used is Elohim. The heavens and earth are created. There are clear time units. There is order. There's planning. God confirms each action with tov. It's good. Tov me'od. The actions of God are described in divine terms. He says, and things come into being. And men and women are created as equals. In the second chapter, the name used is Hashem Elohim. The earth is mentioned before the heavens. God is described in human terms, planting, as a potter, glass blower, etc. There are a lot of negative words. There's no order. There's no organization, and man is created first, and the woman is created only as an afterthought. Oh, and also the order of creation of the living things is different. Yes, Shaina?
So one thing I also noticed in the first chapter, Adam should be translated humankind.
Mm-hmm.
In the second chapter, it's translated with the sex assigned to it.
Right. Because in the second chapter, we go from Adam to Ish V'Isha, and in the first chapter, it's Adam, Zachar u'Nekeva, which has a symbolic, not symbolic, it's a linguistic significance in Hebrew. Zachar is to remember, right? Nekeva is to specify. Nakav is to has two meanings in Hebrew. To drill a hole is lasot nikba, but also means to specify. Nokev Shem Hashem mot yuma, to say things clearly. And then maybe if we talk about communication, the meaning is that men, right, remembers or wants to create a memory for himself. And the nekeva, the woman wants is clearer in language. She's more specific in the way she describes things than men. I don't know. This is another issue that I want to not now.
Everything you said is, I think, totally right. But I think I see one other difference between Perek Aleph and Perek Bet. I think Perek Bet is extremely human-centric.
Yes.
It's extremely human-centric. It's almost like the Torah is not really interested in anything else except us.
Mm-hmm.
And even the things that are discussed, the animals are discussed because we name them. Right. And the water is there maybe to explain how we can exist if there's no rain. And the first parak is much more, we're at the end, we're important, but it's not at all about us. The second parak is completely about us and how we came to be men and women and how we came to be fallen, and to use a Christian term perhaps, but it's all about us. The first parak is all about everything. Right. I almost feel like Pasuk Daled should almost be read as a summary of what came before rather than an introduction to what's coming.
Right. It is. The first half, the Ve'ele Todot, Hashamayim v'Haaretz v'Yivare'am, is, looking back, and now Beyom Asot Hashem Elokim Eretz v'Shamayim, that's the new description. So you added, this is really the general concept of the differences, but you added another element which I didn't notice, which is that the creation of the elements of the garden, the rain even depends, everything depends on us. It's very anthropocentric, right? So now, as I said, so when we look at the two extremes, the traditional approach and the scientific or scholarly approach, right? The traditional approach says both texts came from the divine author, and they're one and the same, and we have to reconcile them. So any differences between them are only superficial. One of them explains the other, etc., etc. In a way, that approach denies that there are any differences between them. Trying to reconcile them completely. The scholarly approach that started with the School of Biblical Criticism in Germany in the 1800s is that there are two different authors, and those texts were just put next to each other by those authors who knew that they are sacred texts. According to that theory, there are more than two authors. There are four authors, and at least for major authors, and then other segments of small texts that made their way into the Tanakh. But I want to look at those texts from the point of view of someone who believes that everything is divine, and see how those two texts work together and send us a message. Also, one of the problems that I have with the documentary theory, which is not to say, we have to say in parentheses that there could be words in the Torah that gather from a different source, later author. It's when we say that the whole Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, we speak about the general concept of the totality of the Torah. But already the medieval commentators wrote that some psukim, even the Talmud said some psukim were not written by Moshe, like the last 8 psukim of the Torah were not written by Moshe because they speak about his death. Or the pasuk in Bereshit, V'kena'ani az ba'aretz, back then Canaanite used to live in the land. Medieval commentators said it was added later on. It's okay, but as long as it's not a fundamental change to the structure of the Torah. Also, speaking about the documentary theory, the same concept, that the same solution that is given to the contradiction between the two first chapters of Bereshit is given to what seems to be two contradicting or repetitive flood stories. In Parashat Noah, if you read carefully the psukim, you realize that there are some discrepancies about the dates, about how long was the Mabul, whether he brought in 2 animals or 7 animals. So there, the documentary theory says the authors of the text merged the two stories, and they took one pasuk from here, one pasuk from there, and they edited them together. So my question is, if they say in the Talmudic language, mima nafshach, you have to decide who was the person who the editors or those who created this anthology, or the canonizer of the text, right? Were they willing to touch it or not? If they were willing to touch it and edit the story of the flood into 2, then why didn't they do it with the story of creation, which is much more glaring in its differences? And of course, you could say, no, they came from 2 different sources. The story of the flood came, let's say, from Mesopotamia, where already ancient traditions put them together. Well, fine, there are solutions to everything. I think that there is a solution that respects both texts as divine and delivers a message that is deep and powerful. And that message is, Yoel, you summed it up in what you said, that who is the center of the chapter, right? Who is the center of the story? In the second chapter, man is the center of the story, and in the first chapter, God is the center of the story. In other words, we could say, and this is this theory. There are parallels to what I'm going to say now, segments that I found in different authors, but the Hacham who put me on the track to do this research was Rabbi Kaplan. I'm calling him Hacham because he's originally from Turkey and his last name was Karmoli. So Rabbi Kaplan, in his book about the age of the universe and the revival of the resuscitation of the dead, speaks about very in one paragraph, one line really. He says that the equality of mankind in the first chapter and the disparity in the second are the ideal world, God's world, and the real world where we live. And he says we have to be in constant movement from our world to God's world. So the movement for women's rights and women's liberation is part of the coming of Mashiach. This is what he said. So it has to be done in the right manner, but this is part of the process of redemption. But that's, by the way, his only book that was not printed by the Haredi publishing houses, and I wonder why. So it got me thinking, and I kept searching for more sources on that matter, and I found together I pieced what I'm showing to you now, which is that we could say that the first story has a message. It's not about how the world was created, but rather that God created the world, and that in a perfect world, this is how things will be. There's order, there's planning, everything is positive, men and women are equal, and men or mankind is created in the image of God. And if we are created in the image of God, that means that we are all equal without the race, gender, physicality, they don't matter. Because if the Tzelem Elokim, the image of God, is applicable to two beings that are so fundamentally different, it's the first difference that people see when they look at human beings, male and female. If they're both in Tzelem Elokim, then everybody's equal. So this is the message of the first chapter. Man is created in the image of God. He could aspire to reach those levels close to the divinity, and until today we preserve some of it in our language because we speak of humans as creative, and God is the creator. Now, the second chapter happens after the completion of the first chapter. Who was introduced to the world? The last piece that was introduced to the world in the first chapter, aside from Shabbat, mankind, right? So now we segue into man's world. In man's world, things are not working so well, as we know very well today, right? There we have problems. Who is responsible to those problems? We are. If you remove mankind from the picture, right? Let's say if today all humans would find a better planet, right? I don't want to talk about apocalyptic events. Let's say we found a better planet and we have a quantum jump that allows us to all transport to a different planet immediately, right? This planet Earth, will take about I think that's what I read. The oceans would need about 10,000 years to clear away the pollution that we pumped into them in the last 200 years, 10,000 years. But after that, things will be okay. The planet will heal, without humans. We are bringing a lot of destruction and devastation into the world. And there's actually,
Rabbi,
yes, Nathaniel.
I think that the earth is very capable of healing itself quickly. I mean, we saw a lot of changes when the coronavirus first hit, and it was a requirement for everybody to stay inside. Did you see some of the reports of some of the
Oh yeah, no, but that's I know. That's external. That's air pollution that you don't see. But
right.
I spoke about the pollution of the oceans much. Eduardo can comment on that. Am I right, Eduardo? That's your field? What is the verdict?
Yeah, in fact, we are lost because 100 years ago we decided to forget the rationalism, to put the capitalism in the first place, and now we decide to forget the life, the human life, and put the capitalism again in first place. So
Right.
we are lost.
Right. You sent me this study that you did about tiny plastic particles that are in the intestines, right, of
Yeah,
of
I can give some example.
right.
In this year, I wrote 2 book chapters about that, the pollution in estuaries zones, and we found some of plastic fragments into the fish stomach ache. Just that can provoke 5 different cancer
Mhm.
in human body, and we are lost. I can
Right.
give another example,
Yeah.
very interesting. For example, we have I don't know in English, but in Portuguese, anticonceptional. You know, the pills to
Yeah, yeah. Contraceptives.
contraceptive. Yeah, we read observed in urban rivers that all fishes are females due the effect of these pills.
Oh, wow.
So we have probably two two main consequences.
Yeah.
It's dangerous to talk about that with recording, but okay, I will try. The first one, probably the homosexual movement. It's not about philosophy or ideology. It's chemical.
Mm.
Is one point. The other point is most of the pregnant girls can generate females and not males because we have a lot of the female
Mhm.
hormones
Mhm.
in the
Hormones.
water.
Uh-huh.
So we are lost.
Okay. Well, man is lost. Maybe it's good, to be more women in the world, less war. Uh, so, yeah, thank you for that. But so this is maybe in the past when we thought about le'ovda le'shomra, God says you have to guard, you have to protect the earth. Man would have said, what can we do to the earth? The earth is so vast and immense, it will swallow us up. And we see what we're doing now. In any case, the evil that man brings to the world is not just to the planet, it's to mankind itself. The fact that in the first chapter man and woman are equal, and in the second one the woman is secondary and subservient to the man, is the point of view of man as in male. That is his reading of the world. Now, um, and because of that, God is described in the first chapter as creating the world with divine utterances, and in the second chapter as a human, meaning that this is the pagan world, and even the world of today, where we see God in our image. So, in the first chapter, God creates man in his image. In the second chapter, man creates God in his image, or imagines God in his image, right? And therefore allows for wars of religions, discrimination, bias, and all that. That's why in the first chapter we have Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, heaven and earth. In the second chapter, Biom beru Hashem Elokim, eretz v'shamayim, earth and heaven, because we start from here, and we're supposed to go upwards. And that's why order is in the first chapter, this order in the second, positivity versus negativity, and even the names Hashem and Elokim that later on Hachamim associate with Din, with Rachamim and Din. Some people would dismiss it as Kabbalah. It's not Kabbalah. It already appears in the Midrash, and there's a logic to it. The word, the name Havaya, Yud He Vav He, is a verb that combines to be, and being. It's in later on Kabbalah is Haya Hove V'yeh, was, is, and will be, but it's really Yithave. I think that the closest, right, to it in Hebrew is Yithave in the Hitpael building, that which constantly is being sort of created or creating itself, and that's a concept of flexibility. The Yithave is that God, how in Hebrew say lizrom, you flow with reality. The God of mercy, Shem Hashem Havaya, flows with reality, with mankind. if you do this, that we understand that you're not perfect, you're imperfect, and we could work to fix it. But the name Elohim means judgment. Later in the Mikra, in the book of Shemot, v'nikrav ba'al habayit el Elohim im lo shalach yado b'mlechet re'ehu. If there is a lawsuit, you have to come to the Elohim, meaning to the judges. So the first world, which is perfect, can be a world of judgment. Even harsh, rigorous judgment would not affect it because everybody's perfect, everybody's doing the right thing. But the second world, which is the world of mankind, rife with evil and wrongdoing, if that world will be dealt with harsh judgment, it will not survive. And that is the basis for the famous midrash that God wanted to create the world b'midat harahamim, with mercy, b'midat hadin, with rigorous judgment, and then he saw that the world will not survive and combine midat harahamim with midat hadin. So overall, I think to me it's a theory that solves all the problems because it puts all those contradictions one against the other, and explains why they're all how they all fall into one system. That really the title of the 2 chapters is God's world and man's world. God's world is also the world of Gan Eden that we'll read about in chapter 3, because Gan Eden is a perfect place. And here's also a sort of a solution to our big problem with Gan Eden. And we have an issue with Gan Eden, with Paradise Lost. We have this fixation of our loss and how we can reclaim it. And I remember as a child, I learned in I know it was Rashi or Midrash. One of my teachers said that Adam and the woman ate from the fruit of the tree on the first day that they were created, and that goes back to you, Netanel. You said that no days are mentioned, right? So the Adam and the woman ate on the first day, and therefore their punishment applied to all of their descendants. But if they would have been able to wait until the next day, until Shabbat or after Shabbat, their sin would have affected only them and not their descendants. And I remember when I was a kid and I heard that, I was so upset. I went around and I said, I like talking to Adam and Hava. I says, really? You couldn't hold yourselves for another 12 hours or what? And you had to eat on the first day, and that's why everybody's dying around me. This is like, I don't know, maybe I was 10 or 12 at the time. It was really, really very annoying. And I think that's something that bothers a lot of us. When we read the story, come on, you could have stayed in Gan Eden. But the thing is, since Gan Eden is part of God's world, it's the ideal world that was never created, right? There's no Gan Eden. Gan Eden exists only in our mind. Is Gan Eden, you could say, is here, or we can turn this world into Gan Eden. But there is, so why do we read this? Why do we have this story? The story is to give us an incentive. If we read it correctly, it gives us an incentive. We want to reclaim Gan Eden. If we did not think that paradise exists, we would never look for it. Now that we know that it exists, we have to look for it. But the thing is, we have to look in the right place. So let me stop the recording here. I'll remind me to send it later to the group.